This week on Eye on the Clouds.
Shame! Shame, Dick, shame! Shame, Dick, shame! Shame, Dick, shame! Good job, get your act together.
All right, thank you everyone for your patience, one and all. And I think it's time that we begin. Perhaps we should, in the beginning, recognise the traditional owners of the land on which we stand. I understand here the two groups were called the, I can't say it, Gambadjeri and the Bunjalung. And those people, of course, were custodians of this land for a long time. I'd also like to recognise some of the people who got out in the field and did all the hard yakka in the information, the facts about forest logging. People like Carmel Flint, whom some of you would know, many of you would know. Carmel, she would hit me if I said single-handedly, because she would argue that no, she had a lot of help. There were people who stood up in the river red gum forests of Milawa and Barma, and eventually she persuaded Frank Sartor and the Labor government to preserve that area. I think it was a fantastic effort by a very intelligent and committed woman. You might like to give her a little clap, even though she can't hear you. You know, a wonderful girl. Jim Morrison over here with the endangered frog sign. Jim Morrison is president of the North Coast Environment Council. He's constantly watching what's happening in our forests and bringing the information to us so that we can understand what is happening. Sometimes we see logging on property. We don't know whether it's legal, illegal, or just a farmer's fancy. NCEC had to run a court case to get a public register of private native forestry property vegetation plans that have been agreed. Jim's been invaluable in this information seeking. We've got Dylan Pugh behind him with the spotted tail quoll. Dylan, of course, is known for dabbling in the art world, and I think these are collector's pieces. These are magic pieces of art in a banner, and it really adds a tone. Dylan has added a tone to our fights for the forests for, what, 30 years, Dylan, or is that dating it? And has been recognised by governments for his efforts, his integrity, and his verve. He a little rest time recently, but soon he branched back into marine, and now forests have called him back. Dylan might speak to you in a little while about state forest breaches, where he's been quite active. There are other people that I perhaps should mention. John Edwards from Clarence Environment Centre has done tremendous work out in the forest, even helping DEC-W understand what an EEC, Endangered Ecological Community, is, because some of their people don't know. They are doing the auditing, they are looking for breaches, possibly to find them, slap on the wrist. John Edwards goes out continually into the bush and finds these breaches. A marvellous effort. I'm going to miss all the rest of you that I don't know, and some people I do know and should have mentioned, but we need to go on. This is, as you know, welcome to World Forest Day. This is one particular day in the year of the International Year of Forests. We should really do something, and I'm so proud that all these people have turned out today to register their alarm and disgust with DEC-W, the Department of Environment, Climate Change and Water, who is supposed to be the guardian of the environment. And in that role, they are a distinct failure. We all know the wonderful people in national parks, and some not so wonderful, but we've come to depend upon these officers to help us protect the environment. We need to support those people. We need to get those departments properly resourced, with adequate funding, with people who know what they're looking at. All right. I would like to invite Jim Morrison to talk to you for a moment on private native forestry and some of the problems we're experiencing. Jim.
Thanks, John, and a special thanks to John for organising this day. It has been, looks like it's going to be a great event. I've been involved in the private native forestry working group for the last 4 or 5 years. We've been battling to get a decent code of practice that will protect the environment in logging operations. Unfortunately, we've failed miserably in our attempts. As John mentioned, our once great conservation agency has been captured by the dark forces, and they no longer see their primary objective as protecting the environment and protecting threatened species. I might just write, I'm on the Natural Resource Advisory Commission, Council rather, as a conservation rep. This is where we do our private forestry negotiations, and I might just read you this report. It's on the public record. It was tabled at NRAC last week, and it basically telling Mr. Frank Sartor and everyone else how we feel about private native forestry regulations, which are an absolute failure. The objective of the private native forestry project, which was funded by the Environmental Trust, was to ensure that the supply of timber products from private forests are at a sustainable rate that can be maintained indefinitely, while at the same time maintaining non-wood values at or above target levels considered necessary by society for the prevention of environmental harm. Well, the PNF project has failed miserably, particularly in the second part of that statement. Conservation groups last year were absolutely appalled when our conservation agency decided it would legitimise logging in endangered ecological communities. This was basically what we thought was the last straw. But recent further revelations have, in regard to private forestry, have caused conservation groups to lose all faith in DEC's ability to protect the environment during logging operations. We believe that the project to fund the development of the private native forestry code has been an absolute failure. We do not accept the argument that logging in accordance with the code maintains or improves environmental outcomes. And we do not believe that the current private native code of practice warrants biocertification. Biocertification is basically an exemption from the Threatened Species Act. So if you log under the code, you can chop down trees with koalas in them, you can destroy quail habitat, you can trash frog habitat, whatever you like, you're protected because the code has biocertification. You're improving the environment. Old growth forests is another sore point with conservation groups. They were identified as irreplaceable by the Resource and Assessment Commission in 1992, and they were said to be protected on both public and private land. Yet following concerns raised by conservation groups in 2008, a recent audit has revealed that our conservation agency has reclassified extensive areas of mapped old growth forest which should have been protected, and it's now available for logging. We believe that much of these old growth forests have been approved for logging illegally, in breach of the old growth protocol, the private native forestry code of practice, the Native Vegetation Regulation 2005 and the Native Vegetation Act 2003. Based on the audit sample, and the audit was done by DEC, based on the audit sample, we believe that more than 8,000 hectares of high conservation value old growth has been made available for logging and will be trashed. These are now under 15-year contracts. The Northern Rivers Biodiversity Management Plan is an overarching document that was completed in 2010. This was put together by other people in the Department of Environment and Conservation, the actual true conservationists who have no say at all in logging operations. Under the Northern Rivers Biodiversity Management Plan, most of the old growth has been identified as high conservation value and is located within identified priority areas for funding for restoration. This is now going to be a waste of time. It seems ironic that the Northern Rivers Biodiversity Management Plan, which was prepared by DECW, identifies forestry as a high threat to biodiversity values in the Northern Rivers, while the same government department removes old growth protection with the stroke of a pen and claims that logging under the Code of Practice maintains and improves environmental outcomes. It's an absolute joke. In addition, much of these high conservation old growth areas have also been included in the high conservation value layer that DEC provided to local government for use in their LEPs. It was also highlighted, the old growth was highlighted in the North Coast and Mid-North Coast regional strategies. However, it is now unlikely, due to P&F approvals, that much of the former high conservation area will be available for other land use, such as conservation. It should be noted also that the CMA is dealing out caring for country funds to do environmental restoration on many areas that have been previously degraded by logging. So we see the private native forestry code as an ongoing legacy for large amounts of taxpayers' money. The old growth assessment indicated a bias in the assessment process regarding disturbance, where a minor point source disturbance was enough to disqualify the area and make it available for logging. Yet the department knows, irrespective of a minor point source disturbance, these areas are very high conservation value, habitat for a raft of threatened species. Yet with the stroke of a pen, 1 minute they're protected, the next minute it's open slather. These areas can be logged without even doing an environmental survey to see what animals are actually living in them. Once again, maintaining and improving the environment with a chainsaw. Had the appropriate precautionary approach have been taken, none of these areas would have gone across to be logging. It was never intended that small disturbances disqualify areas and make them available for logging. Similarly, if a precautionary approach had have been taken, up to 50 PNF PVP contracts would not have been granted in core koala habitat in the Coffs Harbour region, despite ongoing concerns raised by Coffs Harbour City Council over the last 2 years. They continue to issue PNF PVPs in mapped core koala habitat. Once again, in breach of regulations, in breach of the government's own laws. The timber industry is obviously a law unto itself and has captured our Environment Department. If DEC cannot ensure the protection of iconic high-profile species such as the koala, we must ask what sort of protection will lesser threatened species get, such as the owl, the frog, the snake. They all should be protected equally under our legislation, but we can't even protect the koalas. So, to put it bluntly, the conservation movement has lost faith in DECCW's ability to protect the environment and to fulfil its primary obligation to protect threatened species and biodiversity. And most of this logging is actually going on in our area in the Northern Rivers. There has been over 100,000 hectares of logging permits issued in the last 18 months, which will allow logging without threatened species surveys, which will certainly destroy threatened species and their habitat, and which the government will say is part of an improvement for the environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. My word, if they